dealt with depression and anxiety since I was like 12 or 13. And something interesting happens, particularly when you're mentally ill and you aren't getting like adequate treatment for it. That's that your brain likes to play tricks on you and likes to tell you lies about yourself. Particularly people within like the mental health field will say, you know, when you're depressed or when you're anxious, you can't trust your thoughts. And while I do think there is validity to that, my question then is like, if we can't trust our thoughts when we're depressed or anxious, but we're seemingly always depressed and anxious, what thoughts do we trust? And that's been something that's been on my mind a lot lately as I've been trying to challenge a lot of my beliefs about myself, a lot of my negative beliefs or like core beliefs that were instilled in me from childhood, that I'm not a good person, that I'm lazy, that I'm mean, that I don't have worth in this world. I've had these thoughts for so long that while I understand now where they come from, it's really hard to challenge them because they're so ingrained in my brain at this point. And I used the metaphor with a therapist one time of like a scale, and I told her, I was like, because I think we were talking about schema, which I'm not in the mental health field, so the best explanation I can give for schema is like what we believe and how we believe and how that interferes with our perception of the world. So if we have positive beliefs, we'll perceive the world more positively. If we have negative beliefs, we'll perceive the world more negatively. And it's a lot more nuanced, but I used the metaphor of a scale, and I told her, I was like, I understand that, you know, my negative beliefs about myself and about the world influence my perception of the world. But it's like the negative beliefs are over here and the positive beliefs are over here. And because the negativity has been so instilled in me for so long, it's like weighing down the scale, right? Like it's really weighing down the scale. The positive beliefs, they don't really have the strength to sort of even out the scale. But the problem is I tend to lean more towards negativity. So like one small negative thought makes the scale much more heavy than one small positive thought. One small positive thought doesn't really do much to move the scale into a more sort of equilibrium, right? At this point, the negative beliefs are much bigger and much heavier, that it's going to take a significant amount of positive beliefs for this scale to sort of come into equilibrium. And I think some of that also goes with the fact that when I interpret something positively or I have a positive experience, there's a part of me that feels like I don't deserve it, and there's a part of me that wonders when something bad will happen. Things were going really great for a few months, and now my car has some pretty severe issues that I can't afford to fix at the moment, but I need my car to work. And it's really been messing with my mental health and my value as a person because I have these issues with my car, I perceive myself more negatively. Like, well, if you had just kept up with the maintenance of the car, this wouldn't have happened. If you were just better with money, this wouldn't have happened. And those things could be true. They could very well be true, but at the end of the day, the car still has problems. I have ADHD, so, I mean, I don't want to, like, blame everything on the ADHD, but I feel like if you have ADHD, then you know things slip past the point of maintenance, and a lot of the times you're just putting out fires because you don't deal with the problem when you're quote-unquote supposed to. And when we don't work with our problems, they get worse and worse. Not just the car issues, but I think the car issues have really triggered something inside of me that's made me really question my self-value and my self-worth. And I don't dislike myself because I didn't get maintenance on my car, right? It's so much deeper than that. But I'm really at the point where, and potentially this is a helpful thing, I'm not really sure, I'm able to vocalize, I don't particularly like the person that I am right now. And I think that's okay. And just bear with me for a minute. I'm going to switch topics for a second and talk about social media. And I know that social media is like a cesspool of comparison if you struggle with self-worth and you struggle with understanding your value as a person. I've really tried to curate my social media feed to only include people that I'm inspired by and people that I look up to. But things slip in, and also like Instagram Reels, like once the algorithm gets going, you just kind of slip into like a dark hole of comparison. And I think that can be potentially really dangerous for people like me. I think both my depression and my anxiety make me more prone to comparing myself pretty harshly against other people. I understand that most people really only show the things that make them look good, and what is good, but we can't go down that rabbit hole of what's morally good and what's morally bad. But people typically portray themselves in a very positive light. People typically only show the parts of themselves that make them look more successful, more happy, more beautiful, more intelligent. And at the same time, so much of social media, particularly I think in the sphere of like content creator, is so heavily curated, right? Like you think about people setting up a tripod and sort of manufacturing content. I think a lot about like the moms who make like mom content or who make home content. I remember I saw a video a long time ago of a mom who made money on social media, and she made it seem like she had like redone a nursery, like essentially giving the vibe that she was getting ready to give birth and she was getting this nursery ready. She was kind of redoing the nursery from her last child. And she actually like stuffed a pillow underneath her dress that she was wearing in order to make herself appear pregnant. And she was very transparent. She was like, I filmed this for a brand. I'm not pregnant. And so I understand that a lot of it is fake. We can have a conversation about content creation, and I don't think it's as simple as like content creators are, evil or whatever. I think there's a lot we need to unpack in the same way that we could unpack what is good and what is bad. But to stay on topic, I am very much a rambler. I'm very much a going off in tangent kind of person. That's the way my brain works. But I think the social media and also this sort of like period of isolation that we're seeing more and more in young people, in this sort of loss of community, loss of, safe places for us to go and be communal with each other. I think this is really creating, I know for me, it's making it so much easier to isolate. It's making it so much easier to stay away from people. And as somebody who's already depressed and anxious and has some pretty like twisted views of themselves, I don't want to go out and socialize. And the society that we've currently created, but also is a byproduct of colonialism and capitalism, makes it that much easier to do so. And so this is, I think, created a version of myself where I do very much isolate. And I want friends and I want support, but I'm scared. I'm terrified. And it's not because I think people themselves are like malicious or that I think people are going to necessarily hurt me. but more so, I don't think I have enough value to like bring something to the space. I'm scared that I don't bring anything of value to the spaces that I occupy. And it's like this simultaneously, I understand how toxic that belief is. I understand how unhealthy that belief is. And at the same time, I can't seem to get out of it. In the same way that I've become sort of comrades with my depression and my anxiety, I also understand, and I do have a deep sense of hope for my future. I know that things will get better, and I think that's why I'm okay with the fact that I don't particularly like the person I am right now. I think something that shifted inside of me, though, is now the understanding that things will change. I will continue to heal, and I will continue to get better, and I won't feel this way forever. But I think a lot of things had to happen in order to get to the point of me being okay with that. Our perception of the world is based on what we know and the evidence that we've been given. And so for people like myself who've experienced trauma, the world feels unsafe because we've been put in unsafe positions. And those unsafe positions were very real in the moment, right? Like the trauma that we faced was a very real thing that happened, and it created a response inside of us. The dilemma is when we're no longer in that traumatic situation, we're no longer having to actually be in survival mode. It's a lot harder for us to decipher what is safe and what is unsafe. And so we need evidence to show that the world is not as scary as it once may have been. And I think that's what's helped me feel okay with this sort of version of myself, whatever you want to call it, this season of life, is having had like evidential proof. I don't know if that was a word. Evidence to show that I do have the ability to heal. So when I think about like my past self and where I've been in the past and where I am now, I do very much have the evidence to show that the feelings that I experienced when I was 19, 20, when I was very deep in my depression, very deep in my anxiety, and the ways that I was able to heal certain aspects of myself give me the evidence to see that that will continue to happen. But if you don't have that evidence, it's really hard to make sense of the world around you, and it's really hard to have hope. And that, I think, is like the dilemma that people who don't experience mental illness don't understand. Like it's so hard for me to like intake people who talk about mental illness as like just strictly being positive or just strictly being grateful. And gratitude has been a really helpful thing in my life, especially as of recent. But I also think there's this sort of reckoning with the darker emotions that have to happen. The sadness that you experience, the fear that you experience, the anger that you experience. I think there is in some way a relationship that has to happen between you and your emotions. And it wasn't until I really sat down with my anger and my fear in particular and had a conversation with them. And I did parts work with a couple different therapists. If you're not familiar, it's something from IFS, which is like internal family systems, I think is what it's called. But it's essentially understanding that we are not just one being. We're not just one thing. We're not just our depression. We're not just our anxiety. We're not just our fear. We're not just our anger. We're not just our joy, but rather that there are components of us that kind of come together and form who we are as a being. If you want more information on that, there's a book called No Bad Parts, and that goes more into depth about IFS and parts of ourselves. But I think for some people, like jumping from the trauma and the depression and the anxiety straight into happiness and positivity and joy can almost feel like self-invalidation and can even maybe go as far and as extreme as like self-gaslighting. I didn't really feel like I was necessarily gaslighting myself, but I felt like I was really invalidating the parts of me that were hurt by my trauma and the people that caused my trauma when I jumped from fear and anger straight into joy and happiness and positivity. I'm very in tune with my fear and with my anger, particularly now, in a way that I don't feel like they control me anymore. I don't think my anger was problematic in terms of needing like anger management, and it was controlling my life in a lot of ways. When I got angry, I felt a lot of shame about the anger that I experienced because I felt like I wasn't allowed to be angry. So I would kind of stuff it down inside of me. And I think a lot of people who have identities that we're not allowed to express anger can probably relate to that. But when you suppress emotions, they come out in other ways, right? So my anger eventually came out in like this sort of almost explosiveness that really scared me, and it really made me feel fearful, like genuinely fearful of myself. So making friends with the negative aspects of yourself that maybe you don't want to can be really helpful. I think it does require a lot of discomfort, and I can't give any advice on how to do that, but that is something that I would recommend working with a professional on if you're able to. Well, okay, so all this is to say, I'm not where I want to be. I'm not particularly happy with where I'm at in life right now, and I feel okay with that because I know I have the tools to address the things that I'm not happy about. I also think as a recovering perfectionist, there is an aspect of perfectionism within this that has to be addressed. There's this one content creator, I don't know if I'm going to be able to put his video in my video, but he makes these kind of like satirical videos where he's yelling about all the things that you see online. And he was talking about like, you can't be too mean to people because people's nervous systems are dysregulated. And if you raise your children with a dysregulated nervous system, and then he just kind of went off into like, and you got to change your tire and put oil in your car. And it was really funny and also very telling of the way that I think a lot of people think about themselves, particularly people who are more perfectionists, thinking that we kind of have to have everything figured out right now. The idea that we have to be always good at something or always striving toward more, always working toward more is rooted in colonialism and white supremacy, and it is very toxic, but it is also so ingrained in our society that it's very difficult to move away from. So I also don't think it's particularly helpful to feel guilty or shame around that, but recognizing that the perfectionism that I experience is in part due to how I was raised, but it is also in part a lot of having to do with the culture and the society that I live in. This is not a how-to video. This is not a advice video on how to like yourself more or how to address the things that you don't like about yourself. If you want videos like that, I'd recommend searching like Glow Up Diaries or something. That's probably more of the content that you wanted. And I probably should have said that at the beginning of the video versus toward the end of the video. I always feel like I'm not great at giving advice, and I don't particularly like giving advice. But I am very much a deep thinker, and it's just something that I've been thinking about lately is my perception of myself and where I'm at in life and my discontent with that. And at the same time, I'm okay with it, right? I'm very much in tune with the fact that it is temporary, that I have the tools to succeed, and that I will be okay. If that is not you, if that's not where you're at in life, that's also okay. Like, I never want to judge people for where they're at in life because I have no room to judge anyone for anything. Like, we could sit here and talk about my museum of failures at almost 27 years old, and some people would be flabbergasted at some of the things I've done and haven't done in my 27 years of life. So I'm not like in the business of trying to shame people or try to make people feel bad for where they're at in life. This is more of just me using this as a vocal diary for myself. But if you are experiencing like a deep discontent for the way that you're living life or who you are as a person, one, I would recommend talking to someone about that if you have the ability to, but I'd also recommend easing up on yourself a little bit as well, because the beauty of life is that every single one of us are imperfect human beings, and there is nothing we can do about that. We cannot overwork ourselves into perfection. Perfection as an idea does not exist, right? Perfection within humans is not a thing. And the value of being a person is that we are imperfect and we make mistakes. And in fact, I saw this Instagram reel and it says, if you went back and fixed all the mistakes you've ever made, you would erase yourself. And I think that that's such a really beautiful telling of what it is like to be a human and to experience life in all of its imperfections. And yeah, like I think about all the mistakes that I've made, and I used to really beat myself up for them. And I still struggle with, criticizing myself for past mistakes in some ways. But I also recognize the ways that my mistakes have really formed the person that I am today. The things that I've done that I'm ashamed of, the things that I've done that weren't in alignment with my values have really forced me to look in the mirror and say, like, Adri, what kind of person do you want to be? And let's try to live life as that person. But I have a feeling I'm going to be on that journey for the rest of my life. And maybe that's what all of this is about. But without getting too far into the meaning of life, I just wanted to say thank you for listening to this video. If you did listen, I appreciate it. If not, you wouldn't be hearing this. Let me know what your thoughts are. If this video was helpful, let me know. I like hearing that I help other people, and I really do appreciate you watching this video if you did, and I will talk to you next time.